We're at 5 o'clock. The South Carolina Supreme Court ordered a convicted killer must serve the remainder of his prison sentence.
And a new order just released today. The court says both the state and the circuit court violated the Victims' Rights Act with a previous order that released Jeroid Price. Price was sentenced to 35 years in prison after he shot and killed Curtis Smalls outside of a Columbia nightclub in 2002. Price was released in March after now retired Judge Casey Manning signed an order that cut Price's sentence to 19 years. The state Supreme Court overturned that decision in April and ordered Price back into prison. But he wasn't captured until months later when he was found in New York. In the opinion released today, the justices found the circuit court did not have the authority to reduce Price's sentence because solicitor Byron Gibson never followed the law in the process for early release. They also ruled Judge Manning did not have the authority to seal the proceedings. Now, today I spoke with the Attorney General Alan Wilson and asked how he thinks the public can still trust in the state despite deals like this going on behind closed doors.
This particular case, the law was not followed to the letter. The solicitor should not have done what they did in this particular case, and the judge should not have signed the order because the law was not being followed.
The court also ruled today Price must serve the remainder of his 35-year sentence.